Hey guys, this is Tim from Twice Circled, and welcome to the third part of this special vlog series where we show you the process of creating the Nurse Shark mod. So at this point, we have our 3D model, and it's now my turn to take that and basically add all of the other parts, all the other data files that are required to define a mod so that the game knows what to do with it and how it should act in the game. Now this video, I am going to show you the specific process of creating an animal mod, but a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about are not specific, and this is also the general process you'll need to use to create any sort of mod. And even if you're not a great 3D modeler, there really is an awful lot you can do, especially if you're willing to do a little bit of texture editing. If there's even stuff you can do just by copying and changing the numbers, the sort of simulation, if you like. If you copy some objects and just change those numbers, just tweak the way those work. But if you're willing to do a bit of texture editing as well, just to make it look like slightly different color, something like that, really you can make an awful lot of stuff, and you never have to go anywhere near a 3D modeling package. So don't worry if you're not the best 3D modeler. So next we're going to hop into my desktop, and I'm going to show you the process of creating the basic folder structure for your mod. Okay, so here we have our Explorer window. So the first thing you want to do is navigate to the mods folder. Now, as long as you've played the game at least once, I think this folder will already be generated. But basically, even if it isn't, all you have to do is navigate to this first part of this, which is basically, this is on Windows. But if you look around the forums on Steam, you'll find where this location is on other operating systems, but basically it's in C users and then your username, documents, my games, Megaquarium. This is also where the save files are kept, so it should be relatively easy to find. And basically then you have a subfolder called mods. And then in here what we want to do is we want to create a subfolder for our mod. So we're going to call that Nurse Shark. And by the way, you're going to hear a fair amount of keyboard typing during this video. Try to keep it as far away from the microphone as possible, so it's not too loud, but I am going to have to do some typing. So here we go. This is going to be both the name on that is visible on the workshop. So this is what other players will see when they're choosing whether to download your mod. It's also going to be the name used inside the game. So choose wisely. Don't just call it, silly temp mod or whatever. Give it a proper name. You might as well. So this is just going to be called Nurse Shark. And then the first thing that you want to do is create a file called info.data. Now this is basically contains the metadata for your mod. It's what the game looks for first to determine whether there is a mod in this folder, and if it doesn't find an info.data file, then it will just ignore the rest of the files in the folder. So there's two ways of doing this. I like to just create it manually like this, but what you could do is copy an existing info.data file from another mod. You can download any other mod and then just go copy this one out. But eventually what you want to end up with is with what I'm going to create here. So we're going to open that up. And just getting this across from my other monitor. Okay, so the first thing that I should probably talk you through right now is a little bit about how the JSON data format works, because we're going to be working a lot in JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's generally a format used to define data structures, which can then be passed around in an ASCII format between pieces of software. The other thing, though, is it's actually, for me at least, I think, a relatively easy to read. It's relatively human readable, and I actually find it relatively easy just to write pure JSON and to define my object trees and my objects like this. And this is actually how I've manually written every single bit of data for the game that runs the simulation and tells the game how to operate just in JSON. So once you get used to it, I promise you, it's really not too bad at all. So here are the basic, you can do some searches for JSON, JSON, if you want to learn more, but here are the basic building blocks of any JSON file. So basically you have curly brackets. So this is basically defining an object. So anything between these two curly brackets is is an object, and everything inside that is contained within that. So imagine a sort of tree-like structure where you have an object, and then you can have things kind of branching off that, which are kind of owned. They're like the children of that object, and then each of those children can have children, and so you can create this tree structure. The other building block that you have is the square brackets, which are used to define a list. And we'll see some examples of that later. And the other building block that you'll have is basically how do you actually assign like an object or a list to a variable inside your object. And we'll see our first version of this now. So what we're going to write is this is basically the name of the variable, and the game knows to look for this, and it's basically desc, which is short for description. And then what you do is use a colon, and that basically saying I am now assigning something to this variable. And then in this particular case, what we're assigning is a string. Again, if you're not familiar with like the term string, this is a programming term. It basically is short for a string of characters. It basically means some text, but programmers and anybody who works with this sort of stuff will always just call it a string. So get used to me saying that quite a lot. And basically at the end, then you'll also want to have a comma. So this line here, let's get rid of this little list, right? Because we're not going to use that right now. But basically this line here means assign to the variable called description whatever is between these two quotes here. So this is basically going to be our description. So this is going to appear both in the Steam Workshop and also in your game when you click on it and click on the mod within the mod manager. So I've actually got this prepared, but I'm going to write this out. It's a large tropical, ground dwelling shark that will be available to unlock once you hit rank 10. Okay, so that's what we'll start with. The next one is tags, and this is going to be an example of our first list. Sorry, not sure if I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to mention it again. So every time you do define something, like every time you want to basically have a separator between two things in JSON, you want to use a comma. So it's just like, imagine like a list where if you're writing, in English or whatever, you'd say, shopping list colon, and then you'd write apples, comma, bananas, comma, melons. So that's why you have commas between them, and that just tells the interpreter that we're moving on to the next thing now. So now we are saying, okay, we're going to have some tags. Now these tags are going to help people find your workshop item. There are set number of tags on the workshop, so if you go onto the workshop, you'll see the tags on the right hand side, so make sure you use these. Anything else will be ignored. And then each item within our list, and it doesn't have to be strings, it is going to be strings in this case. It could be numbers, it could actually be little objects within a list of objects, which would be defined with more curly braces. You see, you could do something like this, and then within here we could have more objects, but we're just going to have a list of strings here, and these are our tags. So basically we're going to have the animals tag, because the nurse shark is an animal. We're going to have the fish tag, because the nurse shark is a fish. We're going to have the shark tag, and I'm also going to give it the tutorial tag, which I'm using for all of my personal mods, because my mods generally have some additional sort of, like, they're not just for using in the game, they normally have either some comments which will help you understand the data files, or like in this case we've got a whole YouTube video which talks you through how everything works within this mod. So that's why I mark it with tutorial. And then we've got two more fields, which is author. So we're going to have twice circled, that's me. This will appear again in the workshop, and then you also want to have the version. You can put anything you want for the version. I just go version 1, and I literally am just going to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm probably not going to upload this more than a handful of times, so it doesn't really matter. If you want to have all of this sort of stuff, where you have like a really complicated version number, go for it. You can enter anything you want there. Okay, so basically this is what you want to end up with. Let me just put a little bit of space between these. Now, white space doesn't do anything in JSON. You can put as much in as you want. Equally, if you wanted to, we could separate these and use indentation to make it slightly easier to read. it makes absolutely no difference to the way it's read. It's what's very important is that you get your matching curly braces to link up. And by the way, I use a program called Notepad++, which is really, really good for writing in JSON, because it does things like highlight when it highlights the other bracket. So if you click on a opening or a closing, it tells you which the other one is, so it tells you whether you've got that matching. You also want to be really careful with your commas. If we miss out a single comma like this, it will throw an error, and it won't read in. Although it will, if you go into the mod manager page when you're creating a mod and it hasn't loaded, if it's been unchecked, the mod in the mod manager, then you can select the mod, and then on the right hand side it should show you a list of errors, which will help you find any issues. Now, if you've done this by copying someone else's info.data rather than writing your own, you'll have a few extra things in here, things like load order and workshop ID, and you must delete those because that's the sort of metadata that the game uses and creates, and you really don't want to be doing that yourself. But these ones are the ones that you need to define yourself. Okay, so that is our info.data created. I'm going to close that, and the next thing we're going to move on to is adding our model files to the game. So the way we're going to do that is we're first going to create a subfolder called models. I'm going to go into there, and then over here I have my model files, which Rob created for me, and you'll remember that he had a FBX file and a PNG texture file. Let's have a little look at that. So you can actually separate your files any way you like within this folder. So the game will look through all subfolders, and all it cares about is the names of these things, and whether they're PNGs, which is textures, or FBX, which is models, or TC3D, which is stands for twice circled 3D, which is basically a internal format. It's basically the most simple, quickest format possible for just reading in animation data and model data for 3D models, and it's there so that the game will load up quicker. And so if you start with this FBX file, the first time the game runs, it'll actually generate a TC3D for you, and then actually all you need is that TC3D for your mod to work. It's up to you whether you want to include the FBX as well. If you want to share it because you want other people to be able to riff off your own model, you can include it. If you'd rather keep that as your own thing, then you don't have to include it. Now, again, it doesn't matter how these folders go. So if you wanted to, you could have a subfolder called text for textures, and then you could have another one for your FBX or whatever. For a single animal mod file, I think it's just simpler just to leave them both like this. But if you wanted to create like a file with like 50 different models, then actually having some nice, folder structure might help you quite a bit. The one rule is you must make sure that there are no duplicate names. So, of course, Windows or whatever operating system you're using won't let you have two files with the same name in the same folder. But if you have a subfolder, then it would be possible to have duplicate files. Now, the game will just ignore everything it reads except the last one that has the same name. And because you have no control over the order that these get read, you shouldn't have two files which are different and have the same name. So just don't do it. Okay. Okay, so next we're going to, by the way, that is it. That's as simple as it gets for importing in the model data. Now we're going to do the interesting bit, which is actually creating the data files, which define the behavior and everything else about our objects, and specifically for this video, the nurse shark. So what you want to do is create a subfolder called data, and then we're going to create another text file, and this is going to be another data file, and you can call it anything you want. This matters not at all. Here, by the way, you can't have subfolders, I believe. I think that's how I did it. Don't think you can have subfolders in here, so just put all your data files in here. So yeah, this name doesn't matter at all. So, and you can have definitions for multiple objects within a single data file. So again, split that up however makes sense for your mod. And we're going to open this up. Okay, here we go. So this time, yeah, we are going to do the same thing. So I'm going to create it myself. I'm going to talk you through a little bit more about how these data files work. So these work a little bit different to the info files. With a data file, or a file within the data folder, you can actually define all manner of different types of objects. For example, you could actually put a staff design object in here, which would basically, define how a staff member gets generated in the game. So, your favorite staff members, Rachel or Dante or whatever, you could create another one of those if you wanted to. And I can't remember exactly. I think you just put that under like this, staff, and then you basically define a list, and then you could put, this would be a staff object here, and it will automatically read that in. And if it might not be exactly this, the trick is just go and look at the vanilla files. There'll be a file called staff.data, and you can just copy the format that's in here. For most objects in the game, you're going to want to use this format, okay? So this is basically telling the game, this is like your parent data object that every single object, every single data definition file needs to start with. And then here you're basically saying, look, I'm about to pass you some objects. And then here you're saying, look, this is my list of objects. And, remember, each one of these curly brackets is an object, so you could have as many of these as you like in there. Now, for this one, I am going to actually go and do a bit of a copy and a paste to make things a little bit easier. So I'm just going onto my other monitor. Okay, so here, if you look at this address bar here at the top, this is basically where my Steam games are installed. So wherever your Steam games are installed, go and find the Megaquarium directory, go into Megaquarium _ data, game data, animals.data. And this is all the animals in the game. Now, this is basically where you should be starting if you're trying to mod anything, is look at the base game files. There are so many examples in here, and look at it in game, look at all of its parameters, and then just see, oh look, these numbers match. So this is obviously how you set this particular parameter. Now, personally, I happen to know the nurse shark is a lot like the tasseled wobbegong, so I'm going to start with that as my template. So I found that in the animals file, and then this is really important. Okay, so this is the ID, this is the internal string that's passed around so that an object knows what object it is, basically. So every object in a save file will basically have one of these assigned to it. So if it has this assigned, the game then can say, look, okay, this is a tasseled wobbegong. These are all the parameters that should be assigned to it. Now, here you can see a curly bracket just before the ID. That is the start of this object definition. Now, if you follow this little line down, I think this is a setting in Notepad++, so you might want to turn it on. We can actually see where that one ends. So what you want to do is select from where that curly bracket ends all the way up to there, okay? And then we're going to do Control-C for copy, and then we're going to paste it here into our list of objects, okay? I'm just going to tab that so it all gets indented. Now, because this is actually a computer-generated file, this has slightly weird tabs. It's like 2 spaces and then a thing here, but so it's a little bit, the indentation is going to be a little bit off on this, and sometimes, especially in the animal section, I've had to mess around with it a little bit, so the indentation isn't always perfect. But anyway, if you keep your indentation nicely done, then you will find it generally easier to work with things, because it will be clearer where one object or sub-object or list begins and where it also ends. Okay, so right, we've got our template, and now we're going to edit it basically so that it's not a tasseled wobbegong, it's actually a nurse shark. So the first thing we're going to want to do is give it a new ID. So this, again, as I've said, this is the internal ID. You mustn't change this, by the way, once you've deployed your mod, because every nurse shark or whatever animal or object you've made in a player's save file, this is what will tell the game what type of object it is. Now, say you upload a mod where the ID is nurse shark, and then someone plays with it, makes some nurse sharks, saves their game, and then they get a new version of your mod where you've changed this to nurse shark 2, or maybe it originally had like a typo like this, nurse shark, and then you add the A. Next time they load that save, it's going to say, oh, I've got this thing here called a nurse shark, and then it will look for that object definition, and it won't find it because you've uploaded it and you've changed it to nurse shark, and all of those nurse sharks will disappear, and you'll get very sad players. So once you choose an ID, don't change it. You're much better off honestly just uploading a new version with an extra object, or like a completely new object or something like that, or ideally just never changing the ID, because you'll get upset players. So we're going to have Nurse Shark here. I also recommend actually just using the same ID as you use for your FBX name. So actually this, if you remember, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the folder. Our model was actually called nurseshark.fbx. So I would just recommend using that same name. So we don't actually need the animals.data file anymore. So I'm going to move that off the screen. So yeah, we're going to go for Nurse Shark. Now we've got tags. Now it actually has the exact same tags as the Wobbegong. It's an animal and it's a shark. Menu tag. So sorry, I should actually explain these as I go through them. So basically, these tags are a couple of things. One, if they have a definition in the strings folder or in a string file, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is basically how the game converts its internal IDs into human readable display strings, so text that humans should read. And the reason we do it like this, we don't just display those internal IDs, is one, sometimes internal IDs can be ugly and they're not actually how you want it to display to the player. And two, if you're localizing the game, which the game is, then you'll actually want to show a different string depending on what language the player is playing in. So anyway, any of these tags that have one of those strings defined will automatically become searchable. So that's one use of this. If you wanted to, you could add a tag. I could have a tag here called Tim or Tim's mods, and then I could add that to my string file, and and I could define that as something nice and human readable, like Tim's mods. And then if someone typed in Tim's mods like that, then it would actually interface search in game. All of the items marked with that would come up. So that's quite a good use if you want to add custom search strings. It's also used for just some internal things in the game. Basically, if it's got the animal tag, that means it's going to be treated like an animal for all sorts of reasons. For a long time, the second one was also used as a subcategory, so it knew which menu to build, which category in the build menu to appear under. That has actually changed a bit. We now have this thing called the menu tag, which is used for this. So what you want to do is assign a category here. So this will make it so under the animals menu, it will appear as under the sharks category. And you could also change this to angelfish, or I can't even remember, it just might be angel. Go look at the examples, other examples from the game if you want it to appear under those. You might want it to appear under your own category. And in that case, you could add whatever you want here. So you could just call this, maybe you've made I don't know, I'm just going to make up a new type of fish called the rumpelfish. So you want it to come under there. And then what you'd want to do is, as I'm going to talk about later, you want to define this menu tag in your strings file. And once it has that, it will actually display as a category in game, and it'll appear in your list. There's one more, which is menu button, which you will be able to find an example of under the Azure Demoiselle in the animals.data file. And this is basically the button on the left. So there are some set values for this. You can look in GUI.data in the vanilla files, and you'll see what these categories have to be. But basically, this is like if you give livestock, it will appear under the livestock menu in the thing. And if you write equipment, it will appear with all of the filters and that sort of stuff under that menu. But we don't need that because the way it works is because this is like a base game category shark, you don't actually need to do that. I'm actually going to do it the proper way though, actually. I'm going to define that because I think it's good practice. Now, I know I don't need to do this, but this will actually make sure that it appears under that. The next one we have here is perspec numbering. So this means that when you generate one of these in-game, it will be called Nurse Shark 1, Nurse Shark 2, Nurse Shark 3. If you don't have this, then what it would do, I think it would use the second category, and it would call it Shark 1, Shark 2, Shark 3. So I've used this for certain objects in the game where I think I've done it for things like toilets and seating and vending machines, where it will call instead of saying coffee dispenser 1, coffee dispenser 2, it would just say vending machine 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a stylistic choice. It's up to you. Most things in the game are perspec numbering, basically. It's what I mean by this we call a spec, short for specification. It's an object specification, and basically, if you turn this on, it will it will use whatever the name, if you translate this into a human readable string, which will just be nurse shark, I'll show you how to do that at the end, it will just be that plus a space plus 1, and then it will just keep incrementing up. The next one is hosting. So yeah, I mean, one thing this is where it gets a little bit more complicated than anything else we've done before. Okay, so everything here we're defining, this is a list, these are just individual fields. This is the first time we're going to actually define a sub-object. So what we're saying here is hosting is, this is defining the hosting behavior, and here we have a object definition, so it's 2 curly braces, and then in here we have various extra parameters that we can use. For all the animals, it's pretty simple. You just want to say it's hosted on a tank. This means that it can only be built on a tank, and it defines some other sorts of behaviors. Now, interestingly, your equipment, like filters and things like that, will also be hosted on tanks, and that will say hosted on tank, but it will also say hosted on pump, because you can also host equipment on pumps. And it'll also have another thing, which is it'll be hosted adjacently, because equipment is actually hosted not inside the tank, but actually next to the tank. So this is actually very powerful. You can do a lot of interesting stuff here. Just use your creativity. You could have things hosted on other things. You could create, if you wanted to, a whole new type of host. So instead of tanks and pumps, you could create, like a table or something weird, and then you could have objects that can be hosted on that table, and you could even have those objects like generate points when viewed by or a table could generate points when viewed by guests. And so you could have, like, I don't know, a load of fossils on a table which guests could look at and generate points. Like, there's so much stuff you could do with this. Maybe I'll do that, I don't know. But this is very, very powerful, and a lot of the stuff in this game is like that. Think about the connections that it's making, and think how you can actually use slightly different connections and actually create completely new behaviors in the game. Okay, so the next one is called contained. So this is basically for anything that is contained within something else. And this is actually defining a movement. So the general idea for contained objects is that they're going to be stuck within their host object. You've also got other types of things like a mobile, which is used for all of the static objects in the game. And this means basically they're placed on the floor and then they won't move. And then you have another one called free, which means it's free moving. It will move anywhere where nothing else is. So that's the guests and the staff. So again, think about those 3 different movement types and think about the different things that you could do with them. Now, within that, we have this advanced spot movement. Everything in the game, I think, uses this. This is basically the main swimming behavior. It is possible for me to add different behaviors by basically, defining additional sub-data structures. But you won't have to worry about that. So main thing you want to do is just copy this in. You want to just change these values. So we're going to make the nurse shark slightly faster than the wobbegong. The next thing is behaviors. These are basically swimming behaviors. So flick moo refers to when a fish basically just turns on the spot. And a lot of the smaller fishes do this, and I think it's a really nice movement behavior. It looks very realistic. And then you've got swim, which is when they sort of go for like a swim around the tank. Now, sharks don't really flick move. They're too big. It doesn't look right. So we make them swim all the time. But these are basically percentage chances. If we had 50-50, then they would do one half the time and the other half the time. Flick move time magnitude, this isn't going to do anything, but this is basically how much it turns whenever it does a flick move. Swim length is how long this thing will go for a swim once it starts swimming. Now, I think the nurse shark should swim for longer than the wobbegong. The wobbegong sort of just like snuffles along the floor a little bit and waits a lot, waiting for prey to come around. But the nurse shark it is a ground dweller, but it doesn't... I think it swims for kind of longer periods. So we're going to leave the slow down and speeding up period as they are, but these are basically these are in milliseconds, by the way. So 1,002, no, these aren't, sorry. These are in frames. There's 60 frames per second in the simulation, and therefore basically 60 is 1 second, 120 is 20 seconds? I think I've done the maths right. This will be 5 seconds, this will be 3 seconds. I'm going to leave those the same. Flick move distance won't do anything for something that doesn't flick move. Turn frames is how many frames it uses to do a rotation. I generally leave this on 2 seconds. You could make this shorter for some of the small animals, so it sort of like flips around quicker. Pause length is how long it will sort of sit there on the ground, or how long it will mill in mid-water before moving again. And you do a lot to give a feel for your animals with these. For these ground dwellers, I like to make them sit around for quite a long time. But then for your smaller fish that like to dart around a lot, you want to have this as maybe just 1 or 1.5 seconds. Iterations you can ignore. This is how many times it does a flick move. I generally find it doesn't look very good if you do anything other than one. It was just something I experimented with when designing the game. Okay, now we have bottom dweller. So you've got two things. You've got ground dweller and bottom dweller. Ground dweller means it actually will walk along the surface. Bottom dweller means it will stay near the surface, occasionally come up and then go back down again. So I'm going to change a few things here. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the preferred height slightly higher. We're going to move that to 0.4 meters. So it comes up a little bit higher than the wobbegong. And minimum dimension to swim we're going to leave the same, although the nurse shark is rather big, so it won't swim unless you've got a pretty large tank, because this is there to prohibit weird looking animations where like there's no space in the tank, and so the animal just like spins around on the spot, and instead it will just sit still rather than do that, because you know it's just not in a big enough tank basically for it to swim around. Turn up angle, yeah, I think we'll leave that the same. Shoal size, I can't remember if this is still in the game. I would not do anything with this. This is probably going to break the game. Yeah, don't use it. It's something I experimented with during development. Okay, cool. So that's defined our movement behavior. None of this actually has any effect on the simulation, you know, the gameplay, but it will make the animals feel quite different. So now we get to, okay, ignore FBX, that basically just means, sorry, ignore bar, that means that this thing has a health bar. I'm just going to put down a new line to make it clearer. FBX is basically defining that this thing, its graphical representation is defined by an FBX file. So this is where we actually link this data structure, this data definition, to our model. So we're going to put nurse shark in there because that's the name of our FBX model. We're going to have to change its scale. So this is how big the thing appears in game. Now I recommend that you use this thing called the scale calculator. I'll put a link in the description. Basically, this is a shared Google Docs. Literally everybody is sharing this exact same one. So don't mess it up. And although I do have a copy, so you know you're not going to cause me that much hassle. But you know, if you want to be a good modder, don't sort of delete everything. And basically all you have to do is, if you followed Rob's advice and you've made your model exactly 100 centimeters long, then all you have to do is type in the real life size. Now a nurse shark is pretty damn big. It is 420 centimeters at max size. Now this suggests a game scale of 4.2, which is basically the same as its size, 4.2 meters. If you had a smaller animal, then this basically scales it up a little bit, so that small animals appear slightly larger in life in the game, and this is just so that you can see them, because the truth is that the scales of the animals, you know, we got whale sharks and we have azure demoiselles, and azure demoiselles are like 8 centimeters long. They are so small and you barely see them if you didn't scale them up. And this calculator will make it so everything has a nice sliding scale, and if you use it, your fish will fit in perfectly with all the animals already in the game. So 420 gives us 4.2. So if it's above 3 meters, it will basically just be the same as the length that you type in. If it's below 3 meters, it will scale it up slightly. We can probably leave these the same. These basically determine the size and the position of your model within, and the rotation of your model for its UI picture. So you can edit those if you want to make it viewed from a different angle. Okay, and then we have the default animation. We're going to make mill. So this is these are the animations that Rob defined for us. Now, this is actually how we translate that into the game. So the game understands them as move, static, dart, feed, turn left, and turn right. There's very similar names, but they're not quite the same. And basically, this translates one to the other. So Rob called move swim. So what we do is we say the move animation, the name of it is swim. So basically make these whatever they're called in the FBX file. If for whatever reason you've got a typo or you didn't use the same naming convention as Rob, don't worry about it. You can just define them here, okay? So they're completely uncoupled, the FBX files. You don't have to, apart from a couple of little things, you can pretty much call things whatever you want, and you can just define them in here instead. Base hue, you can ignore, that won't do anything. Now we get on to the animal's actual behavior. So this does affect the gameplay and how the animal operates in game. So the first thing we're going to want to do is, this thing gets really big, so we're going to want to add an extra stage. So the first variable here is its stages, and this is saying it's a list of stages, and then in here you can see these sub-objects. Each one of these is a stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy that last one, and remember you always want a comma at the end of any object within a list. Okay, but we don't need one on the last one because it's the end of the list. You can put it there, it won't break the game. It's actually better to put a comma in rather than not have a comma. So you can always just have a comma as a rule of thumb, but if you're doing really strict, you don't need one there. So we've got to give this a new name. Now these names don't currently do anything. One day I might actually put these in the game and like display that this animal is currently a juvenile or an adult. So you can just reuse these. I would recommend you do, and that means it will be future proof, but you don't need to at the moment. And I calculated earlier that the max size of this thing would be 110, and that's based on the size, the 4.2 meters. Basically, you just divide the size by 4. I think that's the rough rule of thumb, and that will give you the sort of recommended in-game size. You might want to change that a little bit because some things are very wide and not very long. So, something that's very slender and very long, if you divide its length by 4, it'll end up having a size which feels way too big. If it's very bulky and short and you divide its length by its size, it'll be a little bit too low. So, you can adjust it a little bit. And then we need to come up with some intermediate sizes, some intermediate growth stages. So we've got 68, we're going to go 36, and we're going to make it starting size of 18. And then we've got growth time here. Now, because this used to be the last stage, we have to actually add another growth time for this one. So any stage that has a growth time, it will grow through that in days, and then it will grow, and it will be the larger size. So basically it starts as a baby, 7 days later. In fact, we need to change these. So what we're going to go for is 7, 8, 9. It's going to take a long time to reach maturity, but 7 days to reach juvenile, 8 days to reach adult, 9 days to reach mature. Now just be careful. If you do this, we've copied the growth time, pasted it here. Remember to add a comma here. Okay, so when we started, it was like this. Oops. Because it didn't, like here, it didn't need a comma at the end of it because it's the last one. If you add an extra item to an object or a list, you have to add a comma to the one before, okay? That's the easiest mistake to make when working in JSON. Okay, so that's our stages done. And I'm just going to look at my script, see if there's anything I'm missing. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to tidy up the indentation here. So again, it doesn't matter, but it's just going to make it way harder for you to understand what all these various definitions are. So this eats. Let's bring that in. We'll leave that one out. Basically, all of these are like sticking out by a couple of spaces, which is making it really hard to read. Okay, yeah, that's looking way neater now. Oh, and then we've got to indent all of this. Okay, so I'm afraid all of yours are going to look kind of messed up like that, but I'm doing this just so you can actually understand it while I talk it through. But basically, this is called the stats. Now, this is still within the animal. Okay, look, the animal ends here. So all of the stages is within the animal, the stats within the animal definition. Now, these stats are basically what determines its care requirements and interactions with other animals. So the first, and each of these are basically optional parameters that you can add inside, okay? So we're basically, if you leave these out, the game just ignores them and says, all right, that is not a stat that this animal deals with. But if you add it, so we define the greedy stat, and then we just do open close brackets, which is basically saying like an empty object, and then it will just use default behavior. If we do that, then the game knows that stat is applicable in this case. So by looking for all the different animals, you can mix and match these stats however you like, okay? So the first one is prestige talk. This basically means that when a staff does a talk, about an animal, about this animal, it will gain prestige rather than its normal point type. This defines the amount of the actual points that it generates. By default, I think it's ecology. I can't actually remember. You might need to still put ecology down. I would just put it down. Basically, if you want it to generate ecology points, and actually we do, then you just need to write this. So now when guests view it, it will generate ecology points. This is the eats definition. So this, we have to say what it eats, and then in this case, we're also saying how many days between its feeds. So we're going to make this eat herring. I know that's weird because I've just wrote the word sprat. Now, one of the weird things I did late in the game's development is I changed sprat to herring, so that it would make sense for it to be eaten by certain larger animals. Now, this is just something that's been carried all the way forward. It's sort of annoying, but basically, underneath the hood, the game thinks of the food as sprat, okay? But whenever you see it written in game, it's going to be called herring. So, hopefully you can deal with this. If you ever want someone to eat herring or interact with herring, just write the word sprat. They aren't the same fish, but that is just one of the quirks of the game. And here's the thing: if I changed it now, all of your save files would suddenly break because it would go. Someone, Romeo is carrying sprat, it thinks, in game, but the game actually wants to look for the word herring, and so Romeo is carrying an item which isn't defined, and it will just crash. So yeah, I'm sorry, but it's basically because you guys all have save files that I can't actually update it now. We're stuck with it. But what I have done is change the display version of this, and this is what's powerful about that, having that separation, that modular control. It doesn't matter what the ID is. This could just be called food 1, and then you can just call it whatever you want in the display strings. We'll define those in a bit. So it's going to eat herring, sprat. Days between feeds, it's going to have 1 day between each feed. So it's going to eat 1 day, then it doesn't need to be fed the next day, then it does need to be fed the day after. But it's greedy, which means it eats 33% more. So that kind of counters that a little bit. Greedy also makes it generate more waste. The water quality is going to be 70. It's not quite as high a water quality as the tassel wobbegong. And it doesn't like cave. It likes rocks. They really like rocks. And we're going to bump this up to 20. So this is the amount of rocks that or cave points that each one of these animals needs. So if you have 2 of these in a tank, it's a really big fish, then you'll need 40. Okay, this is determines what it eats in terms of its tank mates. This is what it eats in terms of what the staff feed it. This is a crustacean eater. It's also a fish eater. It's going to eat your other stuff. It also will eat clams. I think this is right. Now I'm going to quickly get up the animals data file. 1 sec. I've written clam eater, and here we go. So this is just make sure I've written it right. So yeah, you can always do this just by copying and pasting. It's probably the safest way of doing things. So I've just copied that from an existing fish. It is a fish. This means that it gets eaten by other fish eaters. That's all that this one does. It's greedy, it's tropical, it requires a supplement, and this doesn't do anything. This was something when I was originally thinking of maybe having things sort of fed at the bottom of the tank. I might do something with it eventually, but I'll leave it on, but it doesn't do anything at the moment. Okay, we're going to add one more thing, which is that it needs the feeding skill. So that's just me pressing tab, by the way, to add all those indentations. So we're going to make it need feeding skill 1, so you know how this works. This is going to make it take longer for staff to feed it, and your more skilled staff will feed it quicker. So that is it for the animal stats. So it's pretty cool. It's a large sort of version of the wobbegong, but it gives you ecology instead of science. It eats herring instead of crab. It has a slightly lower water quality, but it's so big, right, that it's going to be hard to reach this water quality. It likes rocks instead of caves. It eats clams because it sucks the clam right out of its shell, and it also needs some feeding skill. So that's a nice little thing. Now we have unlockable. This determines how this thing gets unlocked. Actually, the truth is none of these do anything. These are all old. All you have to do is write the available level, and it'll do the rest itself. We're going to make it available at level 10. If you wanted to make a science, this is unlocked by with ecology points by default, but if you wanted to make it unlocked by science points instead, you just have to add type equals 1. So if you were making, a decoration or a tank or a new piece of equipment that you wanted to be available and unlocked using science points, then you just write type equals 1. Okay, and then we've got this place sound, move sound, turn sound. Let's leave those as they are. And that is our thing, our object definition complete. So we're going to go back to our folder, and now we're going to do the final thing that I talked about a lot during that. We're going to generate a strings folder, and then in here we're going to use EN for English. Now, if you're going to just support one language, I would go for EN because this is the default that it'll always return to. But if you want to support other languages, then you can add them like this. If you want to have a French version and you wanted to have a German version and a Spanish version, these are all the international 2-letter ISO codes. You can look these up on Google very, very easily, or you can just copy them from the base game. then you could do that. So inside each of these ones, you want to have some sort of strings file. Now it doesn't matter what this is called, so I'm just going to call it Nurse Shark again. And this one doesn't need to be .data, it needs to be .json. And this has a very simple structure. You just define an object, and then you can just start defining your strings. So if you remember, the first one is Nurse Shark. This is basically the name of the type of animal, and it's going to be used throughout the game. So if there's like a quest in the sandbox mode, which is like, oh, please make us, a display with a nurse shark in it, it's going to use this string. So you just want to make it the singular version of the animal, and then you always want to have another one, which is nurse shark .desk, and this is basically whatever this. Again, what this is referring to, all right, is this ID here. So whatever this is what this needs to be. But if you have .desk, that means this is the description. So in game, you'll be able to hover over the little I in the corner when in the build menu, and it will give you this description. And I have this one prepared. This greedy ground dweller creates vacuum-like suction to pull fish into its mouth, and can even suck mollusks straight from their shells. So that's pretty cool. And that actually is all we need for this. But if you're creating a custom level or a custom map, to use the correct vernacular that I've been using throughout the game, or any sort of other stuff, then you might want to, you might have a lot more in here. But if you're just creating objects, these are really the main ones. So we can save that, and that is the basics done. Whoops. One final thing, we're going to define a thumbnail. Just looking for it on my other screen. This should always be called thumb.png. It should be in the root of your mod folder. It should be 445 by 445 pixels. I mean, I think it works if you don't do this, but this will make it display 1-for-1 in the game. It'll also be uploaded as the default image on the workshop, but then you can add as many images as you like. If you want to make them nice landscape images and stuff like that, then you can do that online in the workshop Steam, web interface. I've actually already made this, but what you probably will want to do is you will want to run the game without the thumb. It won't be uploadable to the workshop, but it will load, and then you can take a screenshot of it in game using F12, and then that screenshot will appear in this same folder. Remember that we're in the mods folder here with our nurse shark. You just go up one, go to screenshots, and that's where it'll appear. And then you could cut it down to size using a paint program. I quite like paint.net, and then you'll have that. So okay, the next thing we're going to do is jump into the game, and I'm going to show you this bad boy in action. Okay, so here we are in game. So we're going to go into the mod manager, and you can see that our nurse shark mod has loaded successfully. This has a little tick here. This might not have a tick. If it doesn't, then you want to come in here, and then you want to see what errors. This is quite nice because it will tell you all your files that have loaded. So this is a nice little, double check. Just make sure it's found all of the ones that you just wrote. This is the description. Do you remember the description that we wrote? This is the name that we used for the folder. That's where this appears. This is our author and version that we wrote. And look, because it all loaded successfully, we have the option of uploading it to the workshop. So I'll show you that in a moment. But first, let's test it. Always test your mods, because I'm not testing them for you. So, if you want unhappy players who downvote your mod on the workshop, a very good way of doing that is by not testing it and actually, uploading a mod that crashes the game for people and things like that. So yeah, don't do that. Let's load up the nurse shark. This is something I created earlier, as they say on Blue Peter. That's probably not going to translate well for many of the people watching this video. And there is our massive nurse shark. This is a fully grown nurse shark. Actually, let's just look. It will be searchable. Look, it just works. And look, here's all our stats that we set. And this is my favorite bit. I love it when all these stats come up. Look, water quality 70. Here's the herring. Greedy, requires rocks, needs feeding. There's the supplements. It eats clams. Grows in 7 days. Let's add one of those, and you can just see the difference. That's the baby one. This is our big one. Oh look, we now have to add some more rocks. And there it is. I mean, isn't it beautiful? I think Rob did a really good job with this one. I think it's such a lovely shark, actually. It doesn't look the same as many of the other sharks in the game. It's definitely got its own unique look, which I think is wicked. I love its little whiskers. I think it's a really cool one to add. And I don't know if I didn't mention this yet, but it's one of the reasons I added this one was I do look through that Steam post which has everybody's suggestions for animals, and there's so much stuff on there, and everybody has their favorite animal, right? But ones that came up, this one came up quite a few times because I think people have seen these in aquariums, and it is definitely one of the ones which is sort of missing, if you like. It's like ones that are commonly kept but wasn't in the game, so I thought it'd be a really nice one to add, and I think it does fill a really nice spot. It's a relatively low water quality, which is why it appears only at rank 10, not like the higher ranks. But it's really big, and it doesn't need a rounded tank, so you can actually get away with it in a smaller tank. Unfortunately, if you put it in anything smaller than a mega tank, then it probably won't swim around when it's at full size. Just fair warning there, and that's just because it doesn't really have space. Okay, so let's just get out of here, and next I'm actually going to show you. I'm just going to clear out this game in the background, and I'm going to show you how to upload it to the workshop. Okay, so hop into the mod manager, select your mod. Assuming it uploads successfully and you've added a thumb, it won't let you upload until you have at least a thumb. It's just me making sure that there's at least one image on the workshop. Otherwise, people are very unlikely to click your mod if it doesn't have an image. Click upload to workshop, and you have to just enter some change notes. Now, the first time you upload, there's no changes, so you can just write first upload or first version or something like that. This is just literally needed by the workshop API. I don't even think people will really look at it that much, but like if you do change something significant, then you might want to just write some update notes here, and then if people are interested when they get an updated version of your mod, then they could go back onto workshop and maybe check it out. I mean, one of the cool things is there'll be a link to your workshop page automatically here once it's uploaded, and so they could go check out the change notes there. So if you want to do that, you can, and this should just work. So I'm going to do it. Start upload. This is the first time I'm uploading it. This is the actual version that is going online. Okay, so this will pop up. It'll automatically bring up your item in game. This is in the in-game Steam browser, so we can see our picture. It's called Nurse Shark. It's got the description here. Now you can edit this, although it will get overwritten every time you update it. So I recommend editing it in your info.data. I'm going to actually subscribe to this thread in case anybody leaves me any comments. You can add and remove required items here, so you could make it so that your mod needs other mods to operate correctly. If you wanted to create like a suite of mods that interacted with each other, you could do something like that. But if you wanted to make individual ones optional, you can add or edit images and videos, which is worthwhile. These won't be these won't be overridden by when it uploads. I don't think it will anyway. I think you can just add extra ones and that'll be fine. I think this main one will always be overwritten, but that's fine. And that's it really. Oh, but you will, if you return to the game, it will come up with this little explanation, and it will say by default your new mod is hidden. Use the change visibility button in your mods workshop page to make it visible. And so I'm not going to do that now because I'm actually recording this before this has been launched. Shh, so nobody knows yet. But you can just change visibility, change it to public, and then it will be online for everybody. Click OK. Now you'll have a new option, which is to update item on workshop. So if you have made any changes to your thing, you click this, the game will automatically, because of that workshop ID, which has now been saved into the info.data file, the one that we had to scrub out earlier from someone else's to make sure it didn't get confused, it will know that this is actually an update to an existing mod that you own. And if you use this, it'll bring up the same dialogue-ish, but it'll now update it. So don't worry if you make a mistake, you can always change the files. You might want to change the version number, and anybody who gets that update, it'll automatically have a little thing here saying updated for them to know that your mod has been updated, which is quite cool. Okay, that is the entire process of making a mod. So hopefully you found that interesting. What I want to really stress is that the sky is the limit in terms of what you want to create. You could create stuff that has really interesting gameplay ramifications. One of the other mods that I've created is called OJ Squeezers Need Oranges, and it basically means that the OJ Squeezer in game acts a bit like a gift shop item, and that it needs to be restocked. So you can actually create like new jobs for your staff and things like that to make the game a deeper, more complicated experience if you want to do that. So, don't just, adding fish is really cool, right? It has a great visual impact straight away. But if you're like me, if you're a bit of a mechanics guy, if you would like to be a game designer one day and you want to have a little experiment in designing a little bit of a game, go for it. This is a really great opportunity. Thank you very much for watching, and tell your friends about the all new Steam Workshop for Megaquarium. Bye.